Jeff Ebbs here with FIT. I'm really excited to be hosting another virtual event. Whether you're a first timer joining us or somebody who's been a regular at these events, really appreciate you jumping on and hope you get a lot of value out of these. I'm particularly excited for this one today because we're not only going to deep dive through some nuts and bolts of training, get into some nitty gritty, but also kind of dive into the platform and some of the practical uses of the FIT platform. And I also have an awesome guest, somebody I've gotten to chat with over the last couple of weeks in prep for this. Logan, I'll turn it over to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Logan Ogden. I'm the Director of Athletic Performance for men's basketball here at the University of Iowa. Previously was at University of Utah, Utah State, and I've been using Fit for quite a while since its inception, basically. Beta tested it right away at Utah State and then took over at Utah and utilized it there as well. And honestly, that was probably one of the first things I did when I got to the University of Iowa was get Fit on board here and how I do things in my daily workflow. So yeah, happy to be on.
Awesome, Logan. And my name's Jeff. If you're a FIT customer, we've probably met or you've seen me on these before. Former strength and conditioning coach at Northeastern University up in Boston. I also own a performance training business with my business partner, Alex Passetti, who works in the Washington Wizards organization. And so kind of a double FIT user. I've used it on the institution side at Northeastern and in private practice as well. We're going to be down a panelist today too. You see Corey Peterson on the screen. Corey's an awesome strength coach. He's the associate director at St. Thomas in Minnesota. Primarily works with the men's and women's hockey programs there. And again, a longtime FIT user. We're going to be down Corey today, but he had some slides in here for us that I'll do the best I can to pick up the slack. If you're new to FIT and joining us for the first time, you know what is FIT and who are we? FIT's a strength and conditioning platform designed for professional, institutional, so college and high school, and private organizations strength coaches. Emphasis on strength coaches. It's designed to help you program the way that strength coaches want to program and manage and utilize your data. And the biggest thing I'll say is when I think about our customers, and a huge thanks to a lot of our customers, some of which are joining us. When I think about our customers and those I've gotten to meet in my first 6 months with the company, I think the biggest commonality is that it's people that are trying to exhaust the resources around them. I think, Logan, you can probably relate to this and speak on it as well as like, we're lucky in our roles that we have so much data available to us, right? We have all these monitoring tools and these data streams, and we have administrations, hopefully, if we're in good spots that are willing to make an investment to surround us with tools and help us make our athletes better. I think more often than not, the bottleneck becomes time. I know when I first started at Northeastern, I'd switched from Division III, Division I level. At first, I felt like, wow, this is awesome. I have all these resources around me. And then pretty quickly, I felt overwhelmed by how much was available. And I couldn't create kind of a cohesive framework. And I feel like the more people I meet, again, particularly from our customer base, yourself included, Logan, it seems like we all kind of share that. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think back to even when I was at smaller college, Division II, small Division I, we had resources, but the the amount of testing and data collection that we were doing, it was your bandwidth just wasn't big enough to be able to, compute and take in all that information and then use it actionably, right? So, I think now with these other systems like Fit, like I can take in that information and then have a way to execute seamlessly as well as still program and do all my athlete monitoring at a very high level and still have time to do all the other things I need to do.
Yeah, totally. I know I've gone through this process over the last, really my whole career, but I would say in particular the last 8 years where it's like you work so hard to kind of build this mental model or this mental framework that you're going to approach certain situations with. And that takes so long and so much effort to do. And then to have a tool that kind of allows you to deploy that tangibly, where it's like it doesn't have to exist in my mind. It's like I can get it, into a software system that helps me get it to athletes. And that's where Fit really shines. Um, what I want to do is lay out a kind of a clear agenda for today. So what we're going to cover in terms of data collection and aggregation and how you can utilize it in the system. We're going to lay out the ideas of conditional logic, decision tree functionality, which there's kind of an image on the right side of the screen now of a decision tree and Fit. and the idea of automated training assignment. And I can tell you, I'm guilty of when I first got on board with Fit, and I was talking with Ernie Reimer, who's one of the co-founders, formerly of Utah, now at Louisville. And he first started talking about the idea of training automation. I had heard the word automation and I kind of bypassed it because it's like I like to be, hands-on and integrated and responsible for everything I'm doing. And what I've learned over the years is that again, I can just kind of take my model and my framework and automate it so that it's done consistently. And the biggest word that I want to emphasize today is it decreases the latent period. So I think the biggest challenge is that period of latency where it's I collect data from a data stream, and then I may have to take a few days to analyze it, look it over, look throughout the entire roster, and then make some decisions. And it might take me days or even weeks to be able to turn that around. And at that rate of work, I can't go through that process enough times to make meaningful decisions consistently. But if I can automate that process, those decisions get made a lot more frequently, and I can catch things quicker. I can make decisions quicker, and to be honest with you, more often than not, I can justify sticking with similar strategies consistently for longer. So that's going to be part one, is lay those things out. The second thing is we're going to, Logan and I are going to run through a litany of monitoring tools that I'm sure a lot of people on the call are familiar with. We'll start with survey building, which is a great feature in Fit. Logan's going to talk about load management and how he navigates that with the Iowa basketball team. And then we'll roll through some other ones: GPS data, velocity-based training and power curves. I'll talk about some force plate frameworks. We'll end with some dynamometry and table measures, and end on the idea of kind of building a cohesive framework. So that's going to be kind of our agenda today. And the first thing I'm going to lay out before we get into any specifics is the idea of metric collection and Fit, or custom metrics. Because the first question I get a lot of times is like, well, where is this information coming from? How do I get it in the system? And there's a few different ways, right? Fit is set up so that we have some direct API integrations and an open API that we can bring data into the system. I can also set up what we call custom metrics, which is anything that my mind says that I want to gather, I can do that. And that's a good example here on the screen. Is when I was working with a baseball team at Northeastern, I wanted to set up a table measures assessment. So just hip and shoulder ERs and IRs, and I would want to get those relatively consistently. And so I set up this assessment, which on my end basically just looks like a spreadsheet. And between myself and our athletic trainer and the athletes themselves, we would just get this data. The athlete would input it, or our athletic trainer would just input it. And these values would constantly be updating so that I could analyze them and make decisions as I needed to. And again, I kind of think about this as being like a flagging system, right? That's really what you're doing, is you're creating a flagging system in Fit. And so with that, the first thing I want to do is talk about surveys. And Fit has a survey function, which is awesome. And Logan, I want to ask you about your experience with surveys. I have kind of some ways that coaches are using surveys, and I think we're familiar with all of these. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with surveys, some things you may have done in the past, but also like challenges, because I think there's some inherent challenges that come with surveillance on your athletes.
Yeah, and I think like kind of everything on the screen there, I've utilized in some capacity in a survey form. Generally, how I would do this would be the guys would come in, take their survey on their iPad, which is on their rack, which has Fit, take their survey, collect the data, and then I haven't done automation based off of like an information given to them by a survey like instantaneously. But what the survey does is paints a framework or a picture of what the athletes are feeling or going through throughout the week or that day, and then I can use that information and compare it to other things like my force plate data, my game data, whatever I'm doing from a training standpoint. And then kind of get a better idea of what's going on. If I see something on the force plate, is this related to sleep? Is it related to hydration, nutrition? Whatever that might be. Just overall stress level. How does that correlate? Some of the downfalls or some of the restrictions behind that is just like honestly, just athlete honesty. I've had players that just come in and they just put 5 for everything every single time because they're just filling it out. So having having them understand and almost coaching them to understand that the the value and what I'm looking for and to be truthful and that sort of thing is definitely needed. So I don't ever take my surveys for just completely face value. I do so a little bit more digging after the fact to kind of paint a better picture for what my athletes are going through.
And I'm somebody too. I think they're of tremendous value. And I'm somebody I think's been guilty in the past of maybe not placing enough of an emphasis on subjective data, right? And how the athlete feels, right? It might be something like a session RPE or soreness, things like that, where I've gotten, so in tune to the objective data that you forget kind of the human side of it. And so I think this is a really important piece of data collection. I had mentioned latency before. I think this might be the best example of that, where I think it is so tough. And I've seen this done a bunch of different ways, whether it's Google Forms, QR codes, pen and paper, so many different ways. And then the big challenge is it's like, okay, how do I go through this? How do I make any meaningful training decisions? And I think that's where sometimes surveys almost become kind of a fly by night thing, where it might be something coaches utilize for brief periods, but not consistently. Um, so one of the cool things in Fit is the same way that I can set up a metric, right? So I just set up those table measures, my ERs, my IRs, is I can basically set up survey questions like metrics. And that's what we're seeing at the top of the screen right here is these are just a few, sample questions from some different surveys that I've set up as metrics. And the really important thing here is that even though these are subjective questions, the answers become objectified because as a coach, we assign numerical data to all of the answers. So some questions are binary. Like if we look over here on the right, did you eat breakfast this morning? This is going to be a binary question, yes or no. But I'm going to assign it a numerical value where the yeses are ones and the nos are zeros. Something like, if we're doing like like a mental readiness or a confidence survey, right? How confident are you in accomplishing today's tasks? This might be a multiple choice question, but each answer on the multiple choice is going to get a numerical value, might be 1 through 5. So as a coach, if I know, what the survey questions are and the numerical values I've assigned, I can set up some conditional logic, which we're going to get into as we dive into some trees. I can set up conditional logic that say, hey, if this response, then this stimulus. If alternate response, then alternate stimulus. So it really objectifies the survey building process. The other thing I would say too is that, and coaches typically mention this right away, is that just because you set up this framework doesn't steal your ability to coach, right? So and Logan, you actually mentioned this the other day when we were talking, right? Where it's like, I don't want to be beholden to the framework that I've set up because again, we have to remember to kind of, be a human and be a coach and that we're working with humans and be able to move athletes in our groups as we need to. I think Logan, I can see you want to jump in terms of like group assignment.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I was just gonna, kind of piggyback off that with all these things within Fit, all the automation pieces, the survey pieces. It's a way for us to make things a lot easier and faster. But it's still like even with me, even when I start talking about flipping guys, putting guys in groups or bucketing them based off stress, it's not the coaching eye doesn't go away. You still have to be able to be a coach and feel out the group and feel out the team and feel out individual athletes. That doesn't go away, but it just helps you be organized. And again, the speed at which you can automate some of these things is really really good.
Yeah, agreed. And this next slide here is actually courtesy of Corey Peterson. And, he had utilized his survey building not to basically make a binary choice about, as an athlete, you're either going to be in this group or that group, but we're going to basically assign you some extra work or some extra stimulus as needed, basically to set up a toolbox for the athlete or provide the resources that they might need. And you can see that here with some of his terminology, right? So there's his physical preparedness, his mental preparedness, what he called his fuel up criteria, which, not to speak for him, but I'm going to assume that's more on the nutrition hydration side. What's lost on the left side of the screen here is he called his check-in criteria, which I think is really cool. That might almost just be kind of like a check with me. So something is going on that he wants that athlete to come talk to strength and conditioning coach, whether that's, pre-session, once a week, whatever it may be. And so I just want to emphasize that not everything with the survey building is a a binary this or that. I was really fortunate to work for Dan Boothby at Northeastern, he's kind of an institution there. He's been the director of sports performance for got to be going on 20 years, and he did a great job of kind of setting the vision for what we were going to do departmentally. And one of those things was to make sure that athletes weren't just supplied with the resources they need physically, but to make sure that we were kind of insulating them with everything they needed: nutrition, hydration, behavioral support, whatever it may be. We wanted to kind of insulate the athlete with those things. And we all took ownership of that across sports medicine, strength and conditioning. And this is a really good example of how you can do that. I want to move into some more objective things, right? So some of the cool monitoring tools that we talked about that Logan and I are lucky to have access to, and I'm sure a lot of coaches on this call. This is just kind of a really simple model of on the left side some of the monitoring tools that we have access to, and on the right side some of the decisions that they may influence, right? So internal load or playing load, and we might modify the training load or the dose. GPS systems. I think about something like threshold attainment, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Are there certain thresholds that we want to touch within a certain period of time? Logan, I know you're going to talk about this, and you have experience with that as well. I think about my time working with a baseball program. Range of motion. Do you have the movement prerequisites to do what we're asking you to do? If I had a basketball player who's extremely limited in hip internal rotation, well, that's going to make multi-directional speed really challenging. So let's recapture that first. Dynamometry, we're going to talk about force plate data, velocity-based training. So all of these different tools and some of the things that they may influence. Logan, I want to turn it over to you, kind of starting with the idea of load management and something you're actually working through right now, how you navigate in season for the Iowa basketball team.
Yeah, so this is what you're seeing on your screen on the right is my decision tree to kind of bucket our guys based off of gameplay and loads and minutes played. So kind of how I've got this set up. The yellow group, that's our speed power group. Black is power strength, and then green is strength power. And that's just a fancy way of saying high minute, medium minute, low minute, or no minute. And I name them that because I don't need the guys, saying, oh, I'm in the no minute group, and having any feelings that way. Within this, then I prioritize the athlete. So they'll have a tactical priority of one or two. One being that they're kind of in our rotation or in our top 7 or 8 players, and then a priority of two, meaning they're just outside of that or they're not playing at all. That's going to change frequently, up until Christmas, probably, in terms of coaches trying to figure out the rotation, who's contributing, who's not contributing. Injuries obviously play a role in that as well. So that'll adjust. And then, yeah, and then so go ahead and go hit to the next slide if you'd like. So then for our the route or how I'm using fit to kind of distinguish these groups. If you're a tactical priority of one, and so again those guys are in our top rotation, and you're playing more than 10 minutes, okay, then you're gonna be in this speed power criteria. Now generally those guys are playing significantly more than 10 minutes. But this, for example, a guy gets in foul trouble, or for some reason that game he twists an ankle and doesn't play as much. But I know he's going to play a significant amount of minutes the next game. I don't want him to leave. I don't want him to leave that group. Okay. And then within this program, the emphasis here, obviously, I want them to be game ready. I'm trying to maintain or improve all training qualities, and generally, this is a typically lower volume, lower intensity, just depending on where we are in this season. This is going to adjust based off how many games we play in a week, who we play that week, and just how the schedule aligns. But then I'll program that way. So I'll have three different programs programmed ahead of time, and then I'll assign them to those groups. And then all I do is I change either the priority or I change their minutes played. And then FIT automatically kicks these guys into those groups. You can go ahead and hit the next one, Jeff. So the power strength criteria is very similar. So their minutes played are greater than 10. And then their tactical priority of 2. Okay, then you're gonna pop into this group. So let's say your this is like the middle ground, the medium minute or lower minute group, but you're still playing. I want you to pop into that group based off of a recovery standpoint. So you played significant minutes in the game prior, so then your program is gonna be this medium middle minute style of group. Or if your tactical priority is a 1, but you're playing less than 9 minutes or less than 10 minutes. So you didn't play a ton the game prior, and or maybe you played 5 minutes, but I know that you're probably going to play throughout the week. Okay, I don't want you to fall all the way to the no minute group and we increase your volume or increase your intensity too much, so you're going to fall into this middle group. So um, again, athletes just outside of the top rotation, and then within this program, we're trying to minimize detraining. I want these guys to make sure they're ready to play at a high level, and they're not detraining throughout the block. And again, we're trying to improve all of our qualities. And then again, this is typically a little bit higher volume than what you would see in the speed group. You go ahead and hit the next one. Hold on, turn my light back on. So then this last group, this is the low minute group, or the no minute group. So a tactical priority of 2. Athletes don't really play; they play very little. Maybe they get in like garbage minutes at the end of the game. They're generally they're gonna stay in this group. So if I start to see, a player, I talk to our coaching staff and they're expecting a guy to play a little bit more. This is where I would change his priority to 1 versus having him at 2, so that he falls into that middle category. And then again, same thing. These guys are training for next season. They're training to improve strength and power and speed. They're usually having additional training sessions every single week. So when I program this workout or this block for these guys, they're going to have, the normal sessions we would have as a team plus extra sessions. And then those sessions will vary. Maybe they're higher volume sessions, or potentially more sprint or conditioning style workouts, so that I can make sure that they're ready and prepared for practice. And we're not detraining in those categories either. So again, I make 3 different programs, and then the decision tree and the automation, it moves guys in and out of those programs on a daily basis. So I'm not constantly coming in and trying to evaluate, okay, who needs to be on what program, print out this program for this guy and this guy and this guy. Fit does it all for me. I just type in a few metrics into my KPIs, and then it kicks out what the guys need to do for that day. And then I can still use modifiers and all that kind of stuff that Fit offers if I need to make slight adjustments based off of how the game went the night before, or 2 days before, if we played a double overtime game or something. I can go in and make modifiers to certain individuals or the group, however that might work.
Logan, I have a question and a comment first, and I'll do the comment first here. I think one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten before initially is it's like, okay, I'm still going to write multiple programs, right? Like I have my high minute guys, my tactical priority 1, and my high minute guys, and vice versa. And it's like, well, where's the time saving element? It's like the biggest thing that I've been able to do is kind of this more dynamic programming model, where it's like a sport like basketball comes with a lot of unpredictability. I don't know what each game is going to look like. I don't necessarily know what the training schedule is going to look like. Sometimes I don't even know when we're going to lift, because coach might want to move it, pre-practice, post-practice, something comes up. And so I think a lot of us tend to gravitate more towards this dynamic programming model anyway, where we're trying to make changes by the day. And in effect, what you've done is you've set up a framework where it's like 90% of the work is done ahead of time. You're just kind of finishing the other 10% day by day.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I agree with that. And then two, like, I mean, I've said this to you guys before. Like I said, the first thing I did when I got to Iowa was get fit because when I first got here, went back to paper, and that lasted about a week because the amount of time it was taking me to put everything in Excel and pull over data and calculate and do all of our guys's metrics, and have, 50, Excel tabs. That was, I was just like, okay, I'm done. I'm done doing this. I'm getting fit because everything is all in the same place. Everything's pulling from the same database. Everything's right there and accessible. Slight modifications and changes that I make, turn out to become, big, easy, quick, changes within the program or within the athlete, and I'm not having to longhand everything and take a bunch of time. Again, my bandwidth now is significantly better because I can do all that within Fit.
because it's small, you just said it perfectly. It's small changes, big outcomes, right? It's not like you're
Right.
writing these programs that are just these, completely juxtaposed programs. It's like there may be small changes that stack up day by day that give you, big outcomes. I mentioned I have a question for you too, a little bit off topic, but can you speak about what this may or may not have done in terms of your relationship with the coaching staff and your ability to kind of serve them with the detail that you want? Because I know that's one thing where like I think a lot of times we're under resourced, understaffed, and you'll be having meetings sometimes with coaching staffs where what they're asking for isn't unreasonable. I've just been in a situation before where it's like, I need to focus on the high priority things, and some of these things don't make the cut. And you mentioned like bandwidth. It's like, well, this really opens up my bandwidth. Has it changed your relationship with the coaching staff at all and what you're able to do with them?
I mean, I think I've always had really good relationships with our coaches, but I will say that the ability to give them information instantly has significantly improved. So the ability to make athlete profiles or being able to show them longitudinal data across the team, within Fit, and just give them a link and they can click on it and they can open it up and see all the data, whether it's body weight, minutes played, maxes, survey data, whatever that might be. That information is easy for me to give to them because they want that stuff instantaneously, right? So if I'm in a meeting with them and they want that information, I can just pull it up on my laptop or I could send them a quick link and it's right there and ready for them. I don't have to go down, make a spreadsheet, build it into something in Power BI or build a chart or anything. It's just right there and ready to go. All I got to do is add the KPIs that I want to be selected in the chart, and it's there and ready for them to go. So I think that piece is really really helpful with our coaching staff as well as programming. I mean, I can if I'm meeting with coach and it's the day before we start a program and he's like, I would really like to see this. Can we incorporate this? I can come down and just quickly incorporate that because Fit's so easy to program in and I can program so quickly. Where in the past it's like, okay, yeah, give me some time. I gotta reshuffle some things or whatever. Within the framework of the program building itself, it's really really fast and simple as well. Also, most of our coaches are doing programs that I've written them, and so they're all on Fit too. And them being able to utilize it for their own personal gain in terms of their training and their workouts, they really enjoy the software and the system. So that's a big sell for them as well.
That's really smart. And it's funny when you were talking about, the brief story about your when you started at Iowa, when you're going back to spreadsheets and stuff, you even kind of like threw your hands up in the moment. And it's funny, like I've had that feeling where I think maybe this is maybe back in like 22 or 23. We had the opportunity to buy Moxie monitors, which if anybody who's worked with a muscle oxygenation monitor, it's an awesome tool. It's one of my favorite tools. But my initial reaction towards doing it was like, this is great, but like I don't even know how I'm going to incorporate this. Like I have to learn how to use the tool, and then I have to figure out what decisions I can make off of it, et cetera, et cetera. And again, what Fit enables me to do is like once I become educated in that tool, it's like, well, I can set up my groups in Fit. I can go into the roster and set up my groups. I can set my thresholds that are going to kind of delineate how I split people up. And then all of a sudden, I'm assigning off-season conditioning plans that look very different across the roster. It's not complexity for the sake of complexity, but it's like we don't want to waste our athletes' time in helping them get from point A to point B. Another example of that is we're going to shift gears into GPS data a little bit. So, whether it's Catapult, I had worked with Connexon prior. Logan, you said you guys are Connexon program as well.
Yeah, we use Connects on here. I've used Catapult also at the University of Utah, and then I used another system called Strive, which had some EMG capability. I've used several different systems.
And I talked before about threshold attainment, and I just wanted to give a really simple, GPS example. When I worked with the basketball team at Northeastern, Coach Cohen, he had an expression where he would call one day of the week, he would call it dunk day. And that was kind of his way of saying that like everything we do today is going to be explosive. And, of course, he would do that around the game schedule. But that day we also wanted to be sprint day, right? That would be the day that you want to make sure it's like this is going to be the day that we're going to touch max velocity. And if we don't touch a certain percentage of max velocity, then we got to make sure we run. So I wanted to make sure I was capturing that, right? So it's like, well, we have the Connexon platform. One of the data points is percentage of max velocity run. We can very easily just take that data, funnel it into the system, and just kind of delineate the team into our sprint group and our non-sprint group. And that's kind of what you're looking at on the right side here. The gray box where it says decision node, if I were to be in the system and I were going to click that decision node, it would basically pull up what you're seeing on the left. And so I've just created this really simple kind of command here that if your percentage of max velocity is less than 95%, then we're going to add you to the sprint group, whether that's post practice or if I get them, the following morning or the following afternoon. We're going to make sure that we touch, above 95% max velocity in, an X period of time. So every 5 days or 7 days. I think, Logan, you can speak to this as well. Sprinting is a really easy example of how this gets done, but I know across sports, you might be looking at, high speed sprinting, changes in orientation, a bunch of different variables where you might want to attain a certain threshold. And if you don't get to that threshold, we want to make sure we kind of supplement their training to make sure we get them to that threshold within a given period of time.
Yeah, one thing I want to look at here in this upcoming off season and even into next season is our exertion number and try to find some correlation between total number of exertions or even within the high, medium, and low exertions, what's resulting in one, training, but two, like quality of practice, quality of games, that sort of thing. And so I think that's something I'm looking forward to here in the future in terms of building out a tree to look at exertions and then track that as well as train that.
It's awesome. And I know for me too, it really changed, like just kind of being self-reflective a little bit. Like, I think sometimes you put together a training day and you have an opportunity to get certain things, whether it's speed work, multi-directional speed, explosive power, whatever it may be. And then you start getting in tune with some of this data. And I would, look at post-practice jump data, post-practice accelerations and decels, changes in orientation. And then you bring them down for a lift and you have your multi-directional work in there. And it kind of makes me think like, what am I doing? Like they just got a lot of this, right? So it's like, instead of using the multi-directional segment more for outputs, maybe I'm going to try to change their strategy as the multi-directional segment. If I get a guy who's stiff, maybe I want to try to loosen him up and make him a little more elastic and compliant. That still counts as multi-directional work, but it's me just kind of utilizing the data to make a better decision about how we can utilize that time. And so again, for me, this ties into that initial point that I made where it's like a lot of us have access to these great tools and these great data streams, but I think we all want to be able to maximize them and use them at the best level that we can. A couple of other quick GPS examples. Load management is a common one. We mentioned Connexon. We can look at accumulated acceleration load is kind of the staple metric in Connexon. I have some experience with First Beat, which is more of kind of an internal GPS, but we used to track something called 7-day trimp, which would be equivalent to like a rolling player load in Catapult, where maybe I'm looking more at chronic workload. And the head women's ice hockey coach at Northeastern, Dave Flint, he's an unbelievable person to work for and with. He would be so receptive to some of this stuff that if we had an athlete who tripped their 7-day trimp threshold, so if they went above a certain 7-day value, he would just take them off the ice that day for practice. You weren't going to practice. You'd have a modified lift. We had an awesome athletic trainer who would make sure that they got some regressed supplementary work that day. And so again, easy process. It would just flag and we'd be able to alter as we went. The other thing I want to emphasize too is on the right side of the screen, this idea of KPI combinations. When you build out your conditional logic, which are some of those sentences, these commands here on the left side of the screen, when you build those out, you can use multiple KPIs. So it's not single KPI to create one command. I can use multiple KPIs and multiple commands to create my routes. I want to shift gears into some velocity-based work. Logan, I know you've done a lot of work with VBT and power curves. So I want to hand it over to you here for the next couple slides.
Yeah, so I mean, everybody kind of, most people have an idea of kind of a force velocity profiling. So what you're seeing on the screen is just some data we collected using counter movement jump and squat jump, and I've also done mid thigh pull, but more or less just plotted our athletes across the force velocity curve, and then we utilize this data to kind of again bucket our guys into, okay, what's the low hanging fruit here in terms of training? Is it strength or is it speed, velocity, force production? So we use the chart and the plot and then determine where they fell, and then my programming then was based off of the testing that we did. But back to what we were talking about prior in terms of like coach's eye and just being able to not necessarily just do exactly what the data says. I use a couple other things as well. So I also look at strength index. Well, strength index is just for me, it's just strength testing over body weight or over body weight. So looking at squat, bench, and clean. And their one rep maxes or multi rep depending on what we're doing in terms of testing, and then that chart there on the bottom left, I just break them into groups in terms of position, so guards, forwards, and centers, and then the number that they fall in, and then is categorized to below average, average, good, or very good. So before I just take the force velocity profile at face value and say, okay, this is what this guy needs to improve, I still want to make sure that they have a strength level adequate enough for their position and for the sport. This is basketball, but I have a lot of other sports. We started doing this when I was a GA at South Dakota State. That was my first experience using strength index, and we literally had every sport, and we had it all based off of position within that sport and what we found as again very good to below average. So if I've got a younger athlete in their first or second year, and their force velocity profile says that they need more they need more speed work, but they aren't at the strength threshold that I want them to be, then I want to make sure that they hit that first, or I incorporate some sort of hybrid program where we're still working enough strength stuff or strength exercises or strength percentages to make sure that they're still touching touching that quality and improving that quality along the way. Same thing with especially nowadays with transfer portal, if I'm bringing in transfer athletes. They might be a junior or a senior, but I need them to learn technique and terminology and be able to go through ranges of motion that I want them to be in so that they can execute exercises successfully, safely. So even though my data might say one thing, I'm still might push them towards another program just to make sure that those things are getting trained the right way. If you want to go to the next one, Jeff, you can. And then this is literally the exact same ideology and thought process, but I just used a grid format, very similar to what Hawkins Dynamics does with their profiling page. So we just took the data and we just gridded it versus the velocity curve. So just two different examples of how we're looking at force velocity profiling and then how I execute it.
I love the point. Corey always says, don't forget to be a coach. My business partner always talks about tacit knowledge is the term he uses. And it's like, one of my favorite things is when your kind of gut feeling and your tacit knowledge, when it actually aligns with what you're seeing from a testing standpoint. And it makes you realize it's like, well, we don't have to waste time, right? Like if I mentioned like conditioning programs before, it's like, I might do a metabolic profile and have some athletes that are highly, highly oxidative. like borderline like hyperemic. Like I don't have to put them through your typical like oxidative conditioning plan. That's probably not the low hanging fruit. You might have some basketball players that are highly, highly elastic that are going to create these big collision forces. It's like they might not need plyos at the same level that some others do. So I feel like above all else, this really helps you cut through some of the noise and just get to what the low hanging fruit is. I love that term to help your athletes get to where they want to go.
Yeah, and I mean, and generally, like I shouldn't say generally, but a lot of times I can go through a few sessions with an athlete, and I can say, okay, I think this is probably the bucket he falls in, correct? But with with the tools that we have and the resources that we have and the testing that we can do, and the data that we can collect. Now, instead of me being, yeah, this is what I think, and being 1 foot in, 1 foot out, I can be all in. Okay, this is exact. I know exactly what he needs, and now we can execute this plan flawlessly and move forward that way and make sure that we're getting the best out of our training sessions.
Totally. Really similar example and kind of thought process to what we are just talking about. I'm going to shift into force plate data a little bit. And I actually want to talk about a very specific example and something that's close to me is I was a bad Division III college basketball player myself. So basketball is my sport. I love basketball. It's certainly what I relate to the most. But early in my career, I got a chance to work with hockey programs closely. And so I really kind of thrust myself into that community and that sport and learned as much as I possibly could. And so that's what I can really speak to. And I think I approach hockey athletes a little bit differently, especially from an injury standpoint and a resistance training standpoint, in the sense that that sport is so concentrically driven, right? Hockey players play in a low friction environment. There's a lower coefficient of friction. It's a ton of concentric muscle action, high exertion. And so it's like they're getting that stimulus a lot. And you can kind of twist yourself into a pretzel, pretty easily in that sport. So it's like when I look at their force plate data, I wanted to set up a flagging system that would help me create lifting buckets. Now it's like everybody's lifting hard, air quotes hard. Everybody's exerting themselves in the weight room, but it's just kind of, skewing the athlete out a little bit into some of the drills that I think may be a little bit better. Whether you're in what I call the movement group, which is a big focus on recapture range of motion and compliant connective tissue behavior. It's like let's learn how to capture some degrees of freedom first. A D cell group, which is going to be more on energy storage and breaking RFD, or a force group, which is kind of your more traditional concentric impulse and energy release, more traditional strength and plyos. And so it's like, well, what force plate metrics did I use that helped me identify who belongs in what groups? I laid some of those out here on the right. 3 simple ones I would look at: counter movement depth, peak braking velocity, and left right. I just call it BII, braking impulse index. What did they mean to me? Counter movement depth, just systemic movement freedom. It's just kind of a global representation of motion. Do we have a lot of motion, degrees of freedom, and elasticity available to us? If we're moving through tiny ranges on something like a CMJ, it's an indicator that that may not be the case. Now, is that the only thing? No, let's kind of double and triple down with some other things. I can look at peak braking velocity. Again, connective tissue behavior and intent. If somebody's peak braking velocity on the plate is very, very slow, might tell me that we have very, minimal movement available, stiff connective tissues, or something is way off with their intent, which sometimes you see with like a return to play athlete. And the last one, left-right braking impulse index. This would just kind of give me a left-right impulse comparison to see how people are kind of managing their center of gravity. And I would set up this decision tree here, literally just to break those athletes into these groups, right? So it wouldn't even really be important necessarily for them to know what data is placing them where, because to our point before, Logan, largely those lifts look the same, but small changes give you big outcomes. So this might be the difference between, a power clean or a hang power clean from blocks, right? Where there's a load adjustment, there's a range of motion adjustment. So obviously I kind of knew what the goals were behind that. And the biggest thing I wanted to emphasize was what I mentioned before is it's like, well, now I'm using multiple KPIs. I'm not focused on a single KPI. I'm trying to integrate 3 into the same decision. It has this awesome capability where you can use or and logic. On the left side, it's like, well, how did people get into the movement group? They needed to just trip any one of these flags. For this specific group I was working with, if your CMJ depth value was less than 28, it's like you're barely moving, right? So if you were less than 28, that's going to trip it. Braking impulse index, if that gets way out of whack, if that's greater than 20, that's going to trip it. Or if your PBV is very, very slow, that would trip it as well. And it might, for some it was maybe just a day, for others it might be a week or two, but that's going to get you into, it's like, hey, we got to recapture some movement quality here. For the decel group, you see I'm using more the and function, where it's like if your peak braking velocity is between two values, it's like I did 1.3 and below 1.5. That's how you would get into the decel group. So the big takeaway here is that I can use multiple KPIs by using the or and logic. And this conditional logic or trees can really get as intricate as you want, as long as you can handle all the data that you're collecting. Again, it's not complexity for the sake of complexity, but it just allows you to have a more detailed hand with your training. Any thoughts on that, Logan?
No, that's all really good. Like that's I use the or logic in terms of my middle group and within my in-season decision tree. So just depending on minutes played as well as your tactical priority, there is an or function in which you can come from the bottom up or you can come from the top down into that middle program. And that's happened actually several times this year where we've had a few guys that either one didn't play very well in that particular game or got into foul trouble and they had to fall from the top to the middle group. And I've had it happen a couple times, especially at Utah, where we played a bigger rotation, and where guys that would normally be kind of in the no minute or don't, hardly played would move up into that next group. So that or logic helps move those guys back and forth based off into different programs based off of the stresses they received in the game.
Basketball is such a fun sport too, in a sense that like the team is a little bit smaller. And so as coaches, it's a little bit easier to get very in tune to the data, right? Like if I contrast that with like the baseball team, in the fall, you're dealing with 50 plus athletes. It takes a little longer to get very in tune to the data. But when you're working with a group of, 15, you can get very in tune with the data coming from these different places. And I remember it's like, I had on that same hockey program I was just talking about, I remember I had an athlete where like on days they were feeling a little beat up, their peak braking velocity would be down like in the one teens, which is like you're barely moving. And then on days they were feeling good, they'd be like, 145, 147. And so it made me realize that like certain people are highly variable. Like their lows are really low and their feeling good is a lot different. And again, this process kind of helped me catch that where certain people might waffle between groups by the day or by the week. Like it happens pretty frequently. And again, that's just a use case that I never could manage otherwise. Just to highlight a different force plate example and even using two different tests to create a metric. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with dynamic strength index. So typically a leg press or a back squat to get a raw force production value. And so we're going to look at peak force during a strength exercise. And then we're going to look at peak force during something dynamic like a counter movement jump. And that's going to give us dynamic strength index. And, Corey was obviously using DSI to kind of create his lifting buckets the same way I was just using the force plate to do that. So again, the big takeaway here is we all have different models. I know, Logan, we talked about this the other day. It's like we all have different models and frameworks that we operate under. And largely, we're all trying to do similar things. We're trying to maximize our tools available to us and our resources to help get athletes where they want to go. Combine your knowledge and your model and your framework with the ability in the system, and you can turn some pretty powerful things around pretty quickly. Last example, dynamometry. So again, this was a Corey example here, so not to speak for him, but I think he's a force frame user. I'm a force frame user. Logan, are you guys force frame users, Vault force frame?
We are in the process of becoming force frame users, but not quite yet.
So that's how we would get some isolated strength measures. And coaches who have worked with hockey athletes or even others, right? At Northeastern, we would call these the Tyler numbers based on those old studies. But we're just looking at ad-ab ratios and trying to prevent soft tissue, specifically groin injuries, but just hip injuries. And so we look at ad-ab ratio, and it's like this is just a really simple way you can capture that. It's like get your ad-ab ratios into the system. You see I have my percentages here that I pulled right from that metric sheet in the platform. Okay, I have this athlete here where it's like their ab is down to 52, rectangled here in red, and it's like we need to capture that athlete. And I can't wait weeks or months or until our next block testing period to be able to capture that because it's too long. Something is going to come. Like I used to say this to my colleagues and coworkers all the time, not to be pessimistic, but like if this is the strategy that we're skating around with, or if we're jumping on the basketball court with a left-right breaking impulse index of like 35% bias on the right side, like something bad is coming. That's not like an acceptable threshold. So let's capture these as quickly as we can and be able to add some supplementary programming to help undo that. So really, really cool the way Corey had this set up. And again, this isn't an either or situation. This is like an add to group situation. We're going to get these people some extra programming to make sure we get them in a great situation. Logan, I have some final thoughts. Do you have any final thoughts before I get into this kind of framework discussion?
No, no, no.
So I think a really important thing here, and this is me just kind of speaking, as a coach a little bit, not so much as somebody, who works with fit and who's a fit user, but just as a coach. And it's like, okay, great. So we have all of these tools available to us. We have a system that can power some decisions. How do you go about creating a cohesive framework? And I know that was probably the most challenging thing I've had to do in my career, and I'm lucky that I've had some mentors. And so I laid out 5 things for our guests today that I think can be helpful to consider. The first one, kind of look intrinsically and ID the training principles that drive your model. What are the things that you can kind of back engineer everything back to? Your first principles, right? What are those principles that drive all of your decisions? If you can answer that, then you're going to know what you want to monitor. That's why those force plate metrics were important to me, is because they come back to kind of the principles that drive my model and philosophy. Second thing would be, if you know what you want to monitor, define your KPIs clearly, not the way that whatever the tool is defines them, but the way that you define them. I think force plates are a great example of this. If you go on to the Hawken website, they have a KPI index, and there's like 250 KPIs, and it defines those KPIs very scientifically. But to a lot of us that are working with athletes every day, it's like that doesn't mean that much. So define your KPIs. I did that a little while ago. Counter movement depth, peak breaking velocity, breaking RFD. What do those things mean to me, and how are they going to influence my decision making? Analyze your data streams concurrently, which is what this has been all about today. I think we can get ourselves in trouble looking through a single lens, whether it's the GPS lens or the force plate lens, or Logan, you had talked about the shortcomings of surveys when it's like we get too in the weeds with surveys and it can be tough to see what's really going on because there might be some other things. So we look at those things concurrently and not in a vacuum. Monitor frequently and change judiciously. This is not about making changes every time the data changes. I know if Corey were here, that would be the biggest thing he would hammer, is like, don't forget to be the great coach that you are and use all your knowledge and experience. If it was important enough to make it a priority, stick with it. I've had athletes ask me before where they'll say like, Coach, when are we going to change this drill? I've been doing this drill for a while. And it's like, yeah, it's given us what we want. It's pushing us in the direction that we want. So we're going to stick with that drill. We're not going to make changes just because the 4 or 5 weeks of this program are up. And the last one is what I just mentioned a minute ago. Value your experience as a coach, your tacit knowledge. That's going to be the most important thing first. And then everything we've discussed over the last 50 minutes, can kind of be in the background and hopefully driving some important decisions. Logan, any final thoughts or comments or anything for the audience?
No, I mean, I think ultimately, like we all know, sports or athletics, there are so many variables that can make impacts on the athlete or the team or the program or what have you. So just having a place and the ability to compile all that information and then be able to execute it in terms of whether you're just programming or doing evaluations or making subtle changes to whatever. I think the way it's set up in Fit really helps you do that, as well as like we've talked about this whole time, and in terms of time, really improve the amount of time that it takes to do those things. I mean, I think back to, you were just talking about GPS data. It's like I make recommendations, obviously, to our coaching staff on what I think our weekly build should be within practice, but like that doesn't mean that that's always going to be followed correct, to the T, where we might need to add a few things or take a few things out, or whatever the coaching staff needs to make sure that we can win the next game. So, having that information along with, these other 10 other variables, to help me make decisions in the weight room. It's super valuable, and like I said, it streamlines everything. So
Logan, we have one question that came through for you, pretty straightforward. Just how much data do you communicate to your athletes? And to be honest
uh,
with you, it's a good question because it's something I've thought about too. Where it's like I think one of the one of the challenges is it's like how much you want your athletes to know in these different
yeah,
circumstances.
I would say all the data that we collect is the athletes can see that it's for facing. So they I educate them on what I'm looking at and why I'm looking at it, and then to one prompt a little bit of competitiveness in them too, to improve those things, because I want them to understand why we're trying to improve certain KPIs. The one thing that I don't do is we don't force plate the day of a game, because I don't want them to think that they're fatigued or see that they're potentially fatigued. Not that that's ever really been an issue. How we test more or less the furthest day away from the game that we have available in terms of an on day, not an off day, and then the day prior to the game, so I can see how fatigued we are as an individual and as a group, and then make modifications accordingly in the weight room or make suggestions to the coaching staff. So I have an idea where we are, then we recheck game day -1, but I don't check on game day, because I don't want them to see it or have anything creep into their mind like, oh, I'm not ready to play. That's the only thing I really don't show them. But in terms of all of our other data, we sit down and we meet periodically through the off season individually in terms of goals, setting goals, and understanding what the metrics mean and why I'm collecting them and how I want them to improve them. We set those goals and set those benchmarks for them to reach, and then we do that throughout the in season as well. Less so with our like my high minute guys or our top rotation guys, but the guys that are really training and trying to improve strength numbers, power numbers, speed numbers. We'll meet periodically just to say, hey, we're on track. You're doing a great job, and then get a feel for how they feel like the training is going as well. So, that's pretty forward-facing for them.
It is a challenge I think we all have to have in mind always. Like I think of a story. I had a baseball athlete who was just an incredible athlete, and we would do some RSI testing with that group, and he was capable of like a 4.0. If we did like a multi rebound jump, he was capable of being like above 4, which anybody who's familiar with that data point, that's pretty outrageous. But he had like some side effects that came with that, like some secondary outcomes. So it's like we actually needed to make him worse at that test, and it like pissed him off a lot. Like he would, in my brain, it's like, hey, we're going in the right direction. He would jump and he'd be like 3.55 one day, and he'd come up to me and be, Jeff, what the hell is that? So it's like I needed to be better about educating him in terms of like, hey, this is something we actually want to decrease right now. I don't need you getting better at RSI. As a baseball athlete, I don't need you to be 4.0 something. So it's that that education process is so important. We ran a little long here. What I'm going to do just to finish this off is I'm going to take a couple minutes. For those who have been in the Fit platform, I think you probably knew exactly what I was talking about every step of the way. For those who have not, I just want to give you a look at how to actually execute some of these things in Fit. And so just give me 1 second. I'm going to pull this up. So there's three big things that I'm going to talk about. Logan, can you just confirm when you can see the roster screen here?
Yeah, I can see that.
All good, perfect. So again, it's like we talked about a lot of different frameworks and data utilization today. And by and large, no matter what you're doing, the process is pretty much the same. When you think about any decision that you may want to make that's going to divide up your team, and so I have my roster of athletes here. Well, if I'm going to use conditional logic to divide the team into subgroups or subcategories, I'm going to go up to groups and I can create whatever groups that I want. Um, I've I've created these for a bunch of situations that we talked about today: force plate groups, conditioning groups, load management groups. You can create as many groups as you want, and athletes can exist in multiple groups. Um, depending on what you're doing that day. So if it's a conditioning day, athletes are in conditioning groups. If it's a lift day with specific goals, they may be in lift groups. So this groups list can get pretty long to accommodate any situation. But that's step number one: is I need to create the groups that athletes are going to fall into. The second big piece of this is my metrics library. And this is a simple thing, but one of my favorite things in Fit is that anything that I want to collect, I can create. Whether it's a data point that a lot of people use, like accumulated acceleration load from Connexon, or rolling player load, or a force plate metric that I want to integrate in, or if it's something completely unique to the program I'm working with, which I think a lot of teams have. Basketball coach at Northeastern loved to do just a 3-minute shuttle test, baseline to baseline, 3-minute touches, old school. We were going to hit that a couple times a year and see where guys were at. He said, Jeff, this is what I want to do. No problem. I create that. So anything that I want to either integrate or kind of create on my own, I can do that by adding it into my metrics library, including surveys, by the way. So that's the second piece of it. And then the third piece, of course, is actually creating my conditional logic and my automations. I'll pull up my force plate tree from before, where I talked about using some force plate metrics. I click on that logic node. I have my counter movement jump depth, my braking impulse index, and my peak braking velocity. And I'm just building out these commands that kind of tell my athletes where to go. So that's kind of the 3-step process, regardless of the data that you're working with, the team you're working with. That situation or that process can accommodate any situation. It's about creating your groups on the roster, bringing in the metrics that you want, and then setting up your conditional logic. Logan, anything I missed on that? Does that sound about right?
No, that sounds really good.
All right. So for those that hung in there with us, apologies for going a little bit long, but again, I can't thank you enough for jumping on. And again, to our existing customers too, thank you so much. We love working with you, and Logan, you're a part of that, man. So can't thank you enough for jumping on with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Good luck tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.